I'm jump you. We were talking about the brain, but
Yeah.
I'm interested in how your brain works.
And my
So let's say when you work on your problems, when you would work on your problems, when you were in grad school, undergrad, and even after when you doing your postdoctorate, when you were a professor, when you had a problem, what was the thought process like? Some people needed to understand it. Like, how do you approach problems? How do you decide what problems to work on? And what's the whole idea there?
Okay, well, first of all, how do I decide what problems to work on? I primarily look for cases where there exists some experiment, or better, a set of experiments, which we apparently don't understand within the framework of the existing theory, and then see whether I can work out how to understand them, either within the existing paradigm. Are you familiar with Thomas Kuhn's ideas of paradigms and paradigm shifts?
Yeah, he wrote a famous book on science. But
Right.
Please explain. Yeah.
Yes, sure. So basically, the idea is that at any given time in the history of a particular science, there will be a sort of general framework which governs the kind of questions you're allowed to ask, the kinds of answers you're allowed to give to those questions in very general terms, and the sorts of evidence that you're allowed to adduce in favour of those answers. And this collection of ideas or prescriptions or whatever you want to call it is what Thomas Kuhn calls a paradigm. And his, at least his original picture in his most famous book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, was that within any given science, you find that for a long period a particular paradigm reigns, but then there may be a so-called scientific revolution in which the paradigm will change fairly violently. And then the kinds of questions that you're allowed to ask and the evidence you're allowed to produce and so forth will have changed very considerably. So, I'm sorry, my brain is indeed wandering a little. How did we get onto this? This is because you...
We're talking about what problems to choose.
Well, yeah, thank you. Ideally, I would like to try to find a set of experiments which appear not to be explicable at all within the existing paradigm. And then obviously the hope would be that I and others would be the people who would motivate a paradigm shift, a scientific revolution. And I did at one point in my career think that I had found such a set of experiments. These were the nuclear magnetic resonance experiments on helium, superfluid helium-3 from Cornell University in 1972-3. I was actually so struck by these experiments that I thought that there really was a chance that it showed that the existing paradigm, which was essentially based, among other things, on quantum mechanics, was breaking down, and that one might have to substitute something else for it under these very extreme conditions. Well, it didn't in fact turn out that way. It turned out that it was possible to explain the experiments within the existing paradigm, but it was still somewhat non-trivial to do so, and so that was a really worthwhile, I think, research project. And it's similar, though on a perhaps slightly smaller scale, with these questions I'm thinking about nowadays in connection with strontium lithiumate. Again, we have a whole set of experiments which, within the sort of if you like, the sub-paradigm which we've developed to deal with this kind of superconductor, things don't seem to be working, as it were. And so I'm trying to look for ways in which you might tweak or develop this to... I don't seriously suspect that in this case it will lead to the overthrow of anything particularly spectacular, but it may nevertheless tell us that some of the assumptions we were implicitly making, were not correct. So I think whichever way it comes out, it may be quite interesting.
So when you saw these experiments, the NMR, the nuclear magnetic resonance experiments, you were blown away. But did you have a feeling that something interesting was going to happen, or did we just follow your curiosity to see whatever happened? Like,
Well, yes,
what's
I
your
thought
feeling?
something interesting had to happen in some sense because it was so clear that you're not going to be able to explain these within within the existing, if you like, sub paradigm.
Right.